I'm Mangino. Welcome to the Mangino Talks Pittsburgh podcast. I've been a radio talk show host for half of my life and nearly half of that right here in Pittsburgh. And so on my podcast, we talk about everything that matters to us all, from current events to Pittsburgh history, social issues to sports, politics, to practical day-to-day life. And there are major crossroads here in the story that we're about to talk about. It's about politics. It's about social issues. It's about day-to-day life. And it will have an impact as we look back on Pittsburgh's history. And it's a recent poll that is out by the Commonwealth Foundation that shows that a significant number of young working-age people are considering the idea of moving out of the state. Not only themselves, but knowing others that are willing to consider this. How concerned should we all be? Is the claim that this could be the economic ruin of our future if this were to take place? Let's talk about it. Joining me right now is the Senior Vice President of the Commonwealth Foundation, Nathan Benefield. Nathan, welcome. Good to have you on Mangino Talks.
Yeah, glad to be on.
Thank you very much for making time. Now, this poll, help us better understand what you were generally trying to accomplish in this survey that you conducted.
Yeah, so we started doing this quarterly survey. We call it Common Ground in the Commonwealth, and kind of surveying the attitudes of Pennsylvania residents, and want to track it over time, get their views on, from public policy issues to kind of general issues about how they feel about the state, in Pennsylvania, how they feel about the country, and even some, questions on what thematically. So on this survey, we asked some questions about their summer travel plans, if gas prices have affected that, with 4th of July in mind, what they consider patriotic or not, and some questions on that, but really trying to get the attitudes of the people of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and what's gotten everyone's attention is the portion of the survey that you conducted about young people and the likelihood of them considering moving. I mean, obviously, we've had great migrations away from Pittsburgh going back to the 70s and 80s. Probably a big reason why we have Steeler Nation the way that it is all over the country, with people having ties back to Pittsburgh. The last thing anybody wants to see is another wave of young people deciding that this region, this state, is not going to be home for them. They have to go someplace else.
Right, and that's, it has been a trend in Pennsylvania in the numbers of people, moving away. And it is especially acute among that working age population. And you see that in the trends of where people are moving, who's moving. And in the poll specifically, while overall I asked the question of, have you thought of moving away or know someone who does? Overall, it was 42%. But among those in the younger categories, 18 to 29 and 30 to 44, it was more than 50% have thought about moving away or know others who have, whereas senior citizens are generally more like inclined to stay at their age and live there a longer time, of course. Mm-hmm. But that is very concerning, that we're having younger people really considering looking at other states for better opportunity.
And is it about better opportunities where they are saying, okay, look, we have these major cities across the South and the West, the Southwest, that are seeing explosive population growths and job opportunities, Tesla going to Texas and other opportunities like that. Are they leaving just because, or are they considering leaving because they see job opportunities there? Or are there other underlying issues that are playing a major role?
Yeah, I mean, job opportunities was one of the highest reasons for it. But even higher than that were the top two reasons why they said they might consider is lower cost of living and lower taxes. So the opportunity for jobs and employment, but even the cost of living, that their dollars can stretch farther in other states. And that kind of tracks with where, what states you're looking at, what states do you think are good. And it was those states that tend to have better economic policies, lower taxes, like Florida and Texas and North Carolina. And that bears out in the actual data of where are people moving. It's those types of states that seem to have better job growth, lower taxes, lower cost of living.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's been a long-term trend.
When it comes to cost of living, do you think that Philadelphia has an undue weight as compared to the rest of the state? Because the cost of living in much of the Commonwealth is not as high as it would be in these explosive growth regions of the country, that's for sure. So do those who are responding from Philadelphia may have an impact on this view of cost of living being out of sight as compared to what they perceive to be elsewhere?
Yeah, that's I think certainly is one factor, the cost of living in urban areas. And generally speaking, the urban areas would have higher cost of living, generally higher wages. But with trends we've seen where inflation is outpacing wage growth, that cost of living is getting worse. But even things like gas taxes, property taxes, things that affect us across the state, those are heavy burdens on those in rural areas as well. So I think that cost of living, while certainly is acute in that Philadelphia and the southeastern region, is a major factor across the state as well.
Are you surprised at all that taxes would be a consideration for those just entering the job market or newly into the job market? Normally, that is an issue that people find themselves to be more concerned about as they have families and grow into their careers making more money. Any surprises that higher taxes were rated as high as it did for younger people who were working?
Yeah, I'd say a bit of a surprise, but also not when you think about how Pennsylvania's tax burden is, and that you're right that it is, as people are entering the workforce, they don't think about the taxes as much, and as they, their incomes go up, as they have a family, as they have more property, they are more concerned about taxes. But the other thing is, how Pennsylvania's tax structure is set up is that we have a tax that is really impacting those who are working age, income tax, sales tax, and have, for retirees, it's generally rated a good state because we don't tax retirement income. We have property tax rent relief for senior citizens. So it's actually a pretty good place to retire. It's tougher on those who are, working and employed. And so I think that impact of where the taxes fall is why, and what we've unfortunately seen in Pennsylvania is we have this aging population and fewer and fewer workers, and it's that working age younger cohort that is moving away, and that's kind of bad demographics for our state's future.
When it comes to gasoline taxes, obviously we have some of the highest gasoline taxes, if not the highest in the entire country. But at the same time, we also have a woefully failing infrastructure. How do you balance the idea of we got to figure out a way of getting control of taxes, and then at the same time, our infrastructure is crumbling around us? Your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one is to start looking at the spending side of the equation. That Pennsylvania has one of, I think, maybe now is the second highest gas tax in the country, but no one thinks we have the best or second best roads in the country. And you look at how money is being wasted. I'd point out that a lot of driver charges are going to mass transit, and we aren't charging riders as much. And they even have, we have a lot fewer people riding mass transit systems, and yet they're getting the same amount of money there. That doesn't make sense. We have mandates on prevailing wage. We have regulatory burdens that make it more difficult to build, to repair our roads and our infrastructure. And even if you look at, the clear example is, the I-95 bridge collapse. Governor Shapiro declared a state of emergency, said we're going to suspend all these regulations, we're going to suspend all these permitting deadlines and get this bridge, at least temporarily repaired within a few weeks. Well, maybe all these regulations and permits are delaying our ability to repair our infrastructure there, and that's why we are paying such a high gas tax price, high taxes, and not getting the quality infrastructure we expect for that price.
Are you seeing a willingness as a result of this speedy rebuild, at least temporarily, of I-95 for lawmakers in Harrisburg to have a reevaluation of all the regulations that are in place in order to help speed the process up? And I would guess not only speed things up, but bring the cost down too.
Yeah, that's been a topic in Harrisburg. There's certainly been resistance to some of these, but even point out, Governor Shapiro on the campaign trail talked about the need for permitting reform, need for speeding up the regulatory process. I know that there's been legislation we need to have review of these regulations that are on the books, because there's literally hundreds of thousands of pages of regulations that can delay building projects, and there's been permits. Companies have been applying for permits for years without hearing that you've seen even companies move away because they can't get these answers and get a yes or no on their permit requests. Those are big issues that I think there is bipartisan support for changing that, and hopefully something can get done on those efforts.
It is enticing to consider leaving the area, leaving the state, because there are so many states that don't have any income tax. And I'm curious, from your perspective at the Commonwealth Foundation, if you could begin the paring back of a tax, would you be more inclined to support property tax reductions and then have those dollars shift to something else? Or would you be more inclined to see an income tax reduction?
Yeah, well, it's a tough question, and there's debates on both sides, and that people think the property tax is the one that hurts the most. It's not tied to ability to pay, but at the same time, in terms of economic growth, the income tax is the one that is shown to affect state economic growth the most. Where people are moving, how fast incomes are growing. As I said, a lot of states have no income tax, and those have been the fastest growing and most successful. So I think that's probably more important to the state's economy, and it really amounts to kind of controlling the spending side of it, so you can bring all the taxes down, all the tax burden down. But I really think that we've kind of pointed to the tax that hurts the most, and a lot of times because people are actually writing that check versus the income tax, which a lot of people realizes probably aren't cognizant of the time because it's taken out of paychecks, but really is the biggest tax burden on families and the biggest detriment to job growth.
We are also looking at people that are considering leaving because of politics. Obviously, we are a divided nation. We are very polarized in our political views. To what extent do you see this playing a significant role of wanting to find elected leaders that are more akin to where they are, and this migration due to politics?
Yeah, I think it's not been the most important factor, but I think that it certainly has been on the radar of people moving to we kind of use the blue and red labels now, blue states and red states, or even, within the states, counties or areas which are more aligned with their own politics. And that has certainly been a trend, and kind of Pennsylvania being, more of the purple state. And I think, that may even be worse because a lot of people feel like, well, we're not getting anything done because there's just this back and forth with divided government and the frustrations we have with very little progress on the policy and the politics front.
When it comes to what elected leaders are on the same page about, job growth and what's described as pro-family policies, what are you seeing that is optimistic in the near term to be able to accomplish something in each one of those categories? And are there things that you're concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, there is good optimism in my part on a number of areas. And we talked about some of the regulatory issues. The tax burden has been one that has been there's been bipartisanship, and even in the last year's budget there was a lowering and a plan to lower our corporate tax rate, which had been the second highest in the country. We're phasing it down over 10 years, but moving from the worst tax state to being middle of the pack is a big progress that there's been agreement on that. So I think there is some reasons for optimism that we're moving in the right direction. Even some of our rankings were, you point out the Commonwealth Foundation a lot of times in these economic rankings. Pennsylvania's been 45th to 49th, kind of moving up into the 30s, and we want to be better than the 30s, but that's certainly progress there in terms of where the direction we're headed. But certainly there's reasons for pessimism on, how much progress we can make in divided government. There's a lot of things we'd like to get done to make Pennsylvania a better, more competitive state, more prosperous for all, providing educational options for all families. And we're still a ways away from that, and having, as we see even this year with the, budget impasse with getting the House Democrat control and the Senate Republican control to get agreement on those things.
Once again, we're talking with Nathan Benefield. He's a senior vice president at the Commonwealth Foundation. What do you see as key to keeping young people here that lawmakers and the governor need to make it a point of doing over the course of the next budget cycle or two?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we talk about the things that create job growth, and talking about the tax burden, talking about the regulatory burden, the permitting that allows businesses to expand. A lot of, these things, I think there's recognition that we can be better. But what we really need to focus on is, hey, we need to not just be a little bit better than New York and New Jersey. And, kind of look at this migration numbers that while Pennsylvania is losing population to a lot of states, we're gaining from New York and New Jersey. Those are the kind of the lost states. So instead of aspiring to be like them or even a little bit better than New York and New Jersey, we need to aspire to be as competitive as Texas, as competitive as Florida, North Carolina, because we can truly be a destination state again by taking some of those reforms to make us more competitive and unleash our economy for young people, unleash our energy sector. We're one of the best energy producing states in the country. So there's a great opportunity to really be a leader, not just slightly better than our neighbors.
Do you genuinely believe the idea that we need to stem population loss, and if we don't, we could see our future economic ruin?
Yeah, I think that is a big challenge for Pennsylvania, is that, as population ages, as we're losing young people and gaining older people, especially from our, just looking at the state fiscal situation of, older residents as they retire, going, nursing homes and healthcare costs. That is a cost to the state, and it's the working age population that are paying for that. So, the demographic trends have been trending the wrong way, but I'm also optimistic that we can reverse that and stem that tide.
The stories citing the two major cities, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and the population loss from those two regions, about 1% population loss. But you also mentioned that statewide, the real data is showing that the greatest level of shrink that we're experiencing is not in those urban areas. It's actually more of what would be described as maybe even the T, where outside of the Harrisburg area, across the north of the state and in the west, people are leaving those communities. Why do you think that they are leaving there to potentially leave the state or leaving there to go to the urban areas?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is the demographics of the age of those populations. Some of it is the opportunity that's available there, and a lot of those the jobs that used to been very prominent in that T section, from steel to coal and others, has been declining areas, and more opportunity in some of the urban and suburban areas, and certainly, of course, to other states. So those are some of the factors in terms of why that happens, and why those areas have been some of the biggest where people are leaving for other opportunities.
Mm-hmm. There's a little concern here on the western side of the state that the financial investment that went into the Shell cracker facility and the hope that there would be this tremendous economic impact and jobs that would come as a result of building this, that it may not come to fruition, that it's not going to be as big of an economic boost long-term as it was hoped it would be. Your thoughts about that, and how do you then have the government properly invest in what could be true economic drivers for different regions of the state?
Yeah, well, that's where, and I think, with that Shell cracker plant and a lot of some of the big projects, I think those tend to be overrated by politicians in terms of, we're going to invest, either invest directly taxpayer money or give special tax breaks for a certain project, and cite how many jobs that creates. And it's often hundreds of jobs that are going to be created. But the reality is that Pennsylvania, like most of the job creation is in small businesses. That's where, job economic growth is truly driven. And a policy that gives out certain incentives to certain companies, and we call this press release economics, that politicians will love to say, are giving this money to this one project building. We're going to be there for the ribbon cutting ceremony, issue press releases about how many jobs are created. But getting every small business in the state to hire one additional person, there's no political benefit to that. There's no press release when you hire, small business hires one more person.
Right.
That's where the job growth happens. And we should be looking at our tax policy, our economic development policy is what is beneficial for all employers across the state, all companies, all businesses, and not just the largest, the ones with the best lobbyists, and focusing on that. And that's, a lower tax burden across the board, a better regulatory climate, a structure that is fair for all, is competitive. And so we don't have to, basically bribe certain companies to come to Pennsylvania.
Right.
That's what's going to be able to drive our economic recovery.
All right, let me ask you one more thing here. You have two competing interests, small business and the young people who are looking for viable employment opportunities. And there's also a lot of talk across the Commonwealth regarding the issue of increasing minimum wage, maybe as high as $15 an hour. My thinking is this: you may be able to make a case to where you can have a $15 an hour minimum wage in a city like Philadelphia, where the cost of living is as high as it is there. But that is completely unrealistic when you look at other portions of the state, more rural areas, where putting that as a burden upon small business owners could be damaging, maybe even catastrophic to some of those industries. And there's an aspect to where raising the minimum wage a little bit makes sense, and it's really about a political move more than anything else, considering what the true wages are that are being paid at this point. But at the same time, do we need one, considering that market forces have driven wages up to as high as they are right now? I mean, high school kids, it's easy for them to pull down a job over the course of the summer that can pay them $15, $16, $17 an hour while they're still in school. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head there. That the market forces have driven up wages, and that's the way that it works. And I think that's one of the myths of those who keep pushing a minimum wage increase, like, oh, we need to give all workers a raise. Like, everyone knows that wages are rising without government intervention. That the starting wage at even Sheetz or Wendy's are $12 to $15 an hour. That is because of market forces. There doesn't need to be a government intervention there. And everyone also realizes that, the minimum wage is typically a starting wage. A lot of us have started at minimum wage jobs, and you got raises over time with our work. So the idea that we need to raise the minimum wage just to give workers more money is somewhat of a fabrication. But you're right in terms of who would be hurt by a minimum wage increase. For large corporations and for seasoned workers, it has no impact whatsoever. It really hurts the small businesses who struggle to take on any added costs, and it really hurts the kind of younger workers who are just getting their first job. It hurts nonprofits who often rely on people working almost in kind of a voluntary way for lower wages. Those are the people who get hurt by minimum wage increase, and not versus those who don't really care so much about that, because it's not going to affect their business. And I think we need to understand why there is a downside to raising that minimum wage.
Nathan, do we have to be concerned about this on a government level as well? In Allegheny County, Council just passed a minimum wage that will get wages up to $20 an hour. The county executive is taking this to court, saying they don't have the authority to do this. This is only a county executive issue. But one of the things that I'm thinking about, and many others are as well, and I want to get your take on this as we talk about minimum wage, to what extent are we going to have pressure on wages at a government level if we're going to have a starting wage of $15, $17, $18, $20 an hour, what that will then do for everyone who is making north of that?
Yeah. Well, I think it affects on both fronts. When there is a minimum wage mandate or a mandate for government to pay more, there are certain jobs that are within government that are lower paying, that increase added costs by doing that. But certainly the pressure of hey, I was making $20 an hour, now the minimum wage is $15 an hour, I should be making $30 an hour, and pressure to increase contracts for government workers, other workers, based on that, and seeing how much did they make relative to the minimum wage. It does have pressures for a lot of those negotiating, in terms of contract negotiations, that is going to affect, and then comes back to basically, well, taxpayers have to pick up the bill to pay those additional costs.
One of the things I like to do on this podcast is empower people. What do you think listeners can do to make a difference in helping their young adults in their lives stay here in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, well, I think it is, educating them on, what makes Pennsylvania great, and what we can do to make Pennsylvania thrive even more, and what connecting that those policy issues we've talked about to the future in staying in the state. And this is something we've at Commonwealth Foundation have tried to work towards. Of hey, why do we do so much work on the state budget and try and keep the state budget in line and not overspend? And the answer is, well, state spending is what drives up higher taxes. Mm-hmm. Higher taxes is what drives employers and families away. And that's why, for a lot of people, like why you're looking away, or why your kids and your grandkids are looking to move away, is because of that burden. So tying those policies together and explaining like the reason why there is outmigration is tied to public policy and engaging on that front.
And Nathan Benefield, once again, Senior Vice President of the Commonwealth Foundation, joining us on Mangino Talks. Nathan, thank you very much for your time. Do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
I want to thank all of you for listening to the show. Please be sure to click the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. For more on me and the show, be sure to visit manginotalks.com. If there's a topic that you would like me to talk about or a guest that you would like me to have on, just send me an email, mangino@manginotalks.com. Follow me on your favorite social media platform by using @ManginoTalks. And once you find me, please like, follow, subscribe, and share the pages with your friends and your family. And thanks again for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast.
Oh, I want to talk to you.